rating. I'm going to hand it on over to the gentlemen since it seems like they're ready and raring to go. So I'm going to hand it over to them and they're going to get started on your live reading for you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Steve Sleeper and Tom Sharon here. I've got the New York Times, and Tom's going to take the Lincoln Journal-Star this evening. And we'll start off with the New York Times. U.S. stocks fell slightly in quiet trading Monday as investors worked through several company announcements and prepared for the start of company earnings releases. Healthcare companies were solidly higher. Global markets rose modestly. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 55.75 points, or 0.3%, to 17,737. The Standard & Poor's 500 index lost 6.65 points, or 0.3%, to 2,066.13. NASDAQ Composite lost 22.7 points, or 0.5%, to 4,891.80. While stocks have recovered most of their losses from earlier in the year, investors remain somewhat pessimistic about the market in the near term, especially ahead of the quarterly earnings reporting season, which unofficially begins next week with results from aluminum mining company Alcoa. Profits of companies in the S&P 500 are expected to drop 8.5% from a year ago, according to data from FactSet, with most of that decline coming from the oil and gas sector. No surprise there. This is despite the continually positive economic reports out of the U.S., including last week's job numbers and manufacturing data. While the economic fundamentals are good, investor sentiment is still quite negative, said Samantha Azzarello, a global market strategist at JP Morgan Funds. The low expectations for company earnings mean that stock values remain relatively high. Investors are paying roughly $18.63 for every dollar of earnings in the S&P 500, well below the $14 to $15 they typically pay. We're going to need a big improvement in companies' results for stocks to move higher, said Christina Hooper, head of U.S. investment strategies at Alliance Global Investors. Stocks were not as impacted by a noticeable drop in oil prices on Monday, continuing a trend that started last week. Benchmark U.S. crude fell $1.09, or 3%, to $35.70 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange. Brent crude, used to price international oils, lost 98 cents to $37.69 a barrel in London, $37.69 a barrel. Weeks earlier, a sharp drop in oil prices could have reverberated far more greatly in the stock market. Azario says the breakdown in oil's influence on stocks could ultimately be a good thing. The market just has to work itself out. In individual company news, Virgin America jumped $16.20, or 42%, to $55.11 after the company agreed to be bought by Alaskan Air Group. Shares of Alaska fell $3.09, or 4%, to $78.92. JetBlue, which had bid for Virgin as well, fell 92 cents, or 4.3%, to $20.41. Tesla Motors rose $9.40, or 4%, to $246.99 a share after the company announced it had received 276,000 pre-orders for its highly anticipated Model 3, which was unveiled Thursday. Bond prices rose slightly. The yield on the 10-year Treasury note fell to $1.76% from 1.77%. The euro was mostly unchanged at $1.1397, while the dollar fell to 111.26 yen from 111.73 yen. In other energy markets, heating oil fell 4 cents to $1.089 a gallon. Wholesale gasoline futures fell 2 cents to $1.377 a gallon, and natural gas rose 4 cents to $1.998 per thousand cubic feet. In the metals markets, gold fell $4.20 to 1,219.30 an ounce. Silver fell 10 cents to $14.94 an ounce, and copper fell 2 cents to $2.14 a pound. Tom, what you got there from the Lincoln Journal-Star?
Well, we'll start out with the Senate GOP strategy for dealing with Trump. Keep it local. For months, Donald Trump has dominated the political scene like no other. But listen to endangered Senate Republicans as they campaign for re-election, and you might not even know he exists. In Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey chaired a hearing in Scranton, an opioid abuse, a major issue in his state, and others. In Ohio, Rob Portman delivered remarks to the City Club of Cleveland about criminal justice reform. In Wisconsin, Ron Johnson boasted of his fight against a federal clean water rule opposed by local farmers. In each case, the presidential race was an afterthought, if that. These efforts and others during the Senate's just completed spring recess illustrate a strategy born of necessity as Republicans work feverishly to hang on to their narrow Senate majority in November. From Nevada to New Hampshire, GOP candidates and imperiled incumbents are blowing off questions about Trump, the presidential race, and the Supreme Court as they try to box out a national political atmosphere increasingly unfavorable to their candidates, focusing relentlessly instead on local issues in their states. GOP senators should campaign like they're running for sheriff, said Ward Baker, executive director of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the campaign arm of the Senate GOP. That means that when asked about the latest eyebrow-raising pronouncement from Trump, candidates will voice their disagreement, then immediately move on. They will note that they are running for Senate, not president, and start talking about, say, water quality in Lake Erie, a perennial focus for Portman. The key part is going to be making sure your identity is separate from the top of the ticket and that people know you for you and know your record. And that's separate from whatever else is going on, says Brian Walsh, veteran GOP strategist and former Senate communications director. Democrats scoff at the suggestion the GOP strategy can succeed in a political environment focused overwhelmingly on national issues and dominated by Trump, whose disparaging comments about women, minorities, and others have him struggling in the polls with key voter blocs. Even if the unpredictable businessman doesn't end up as the Republicans' presidential nominee, Democrats insist that the other leading option, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, will leave Republicans arguably worse off because Cruz's unyielding brand of conservatism could alienate independents who might be open to Trump. It shows you the trouble Republicans are in, that they are running away from their national candidates and party platform. But it won't work, said Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, who is in line to become majority leader if the Democrats succeed in retaking Senate control. If there ever was an election where national issues are going to dominate, it's this one. Indeed, the strategy of trying to keep individual races local in the face of a hostile national environment is nothing new, and officials on both sides acknowledge it has its limits. Just 2 years ago, Democrats were taking much the same approach as they contended with President Barack Obama's low approval ratings amid a host of unfavorable national and international developments, from the Ebola epidemic to Islamic State attacks overseas. It didn't work, and their Senate majority got washed away in a devastating 9-seat loss, giving Republicans a 54-46 edge. This time, the imperative for Senate Republicans to keep it local is even more urgent. given the potential for a GOP wipeout on the presidential level. Even many Republicans, talking privately, predict that a Trump or Cruz candidacy will spell certain defeat for their party. And if that does loom, a Republican Senate would stand as the last line of defense against the Democratic president and his or her Supreme Court nominees, an argument that strategists on both sides anticipate could lead GOP donors to shift their spending from the presidential race to Senate campaigns in months to come. Republican Senate campaign officials insist that they can beat the national political tide, arguing that they've been preparing to do so since the day after the 2014 elections. The GOP was always going to be at a disadvantage in this year's Senate races, since the party is defending more than twice as many seats as Democrats, including 7 in states Obama won in 2012. Led by Baker, a former Marine, party officials are working methodically from their military-themed headquarters near the Capitol, where staffers start arriving before 4 a.m. to execute a game plan that includes making individual direct contact with as many voters as possible, even in states traditionally considered safe for the GOP, like Alabama. They have contacted 1.5 million voters in Ohio so far, and almost 1 million in Alabama, ahead of the March 1 primary, officials said. Yet Democrats argue the GOP efforts are being drowned out by the national focus on Trump, Cruz, and the presidential race, and no amount of effort by Republican senators can change the subject. Since most Republicans have pledged to support the eventual GOP nominee, Democrats say there's no way Republicans can escape Trump or Cruz, and Democratic candidates won't let them if they try. In Illinois, where GOP Senator Mark Kirk faces an uphill fight for his seat, Democrat Tammy Duckworth released a video featuring ominous music, Trump making a series of provocative statements, and Kirk saying repeatedly of Trump, "If he was a nominee, I certainly would support him." Steve?
Okay, over to the, the New York Times, Tom. Some international news out of Brazil, Dateline Brasilia. The silver-haired senator from Brazil's western frontier was still in his pajamas when federal police agents banged at the door of his suite at the Royal Tulip, the futuristic luxury hotel that serves as a bastion for much of Brazil's political elite. It was 6 a.m. The agents were armed with a secret recording that sounded like the plot for a Hollywood thriller. The senator, Delisio de Amara, had been caught detailing an elaborate plan for an oilman ensnared in Brazil's spiraling graft scandal to flee the country on a private plane. Amario, 61, was until his arrest that morning in Brasilia in late November, the governing party's most powerful leader in the Senate. He quickly sought a plea agreement, but prosecutors let him fester in prison for weeks, making a deal only after the disgraced senator provided one stunning disclosure after another that portrayed his former comrades and that betrayed his former comrades and brought the government of President Dilma Rousseff ever closer to collapse. I felt like I had just crashed into a wall after a high-speed chase. We called Amaral, who was freed in February. I messed things up, so I figured I needed a chance to make them right again. You need to be pragmatic. Seeking to turn Mr. Amaral definitively against Ms. Rosaruff and her Workers' Party, investigators toyed with codenaming their operation Cataline after the renegade patrician whose conspiracies rolled the Roman Senate in the 1st century BC. The senator's accounts of colossal bribes, backroom oil deals, and desperate cover-ups pieced together from interviews, leaked intercepts of telephone conversations, and court filings offer a rare glimpse into how a leftist party that rose to power vowing to stamp out the corruption of a privileged political elite, ended up embracing its predecessor's practices. His testimony has accelerated Brazil's political crisis, in which fearful rulers are masterminding power grabs, secretly recording each other, and preparing for the day that they too might find themselves on the wrong side of an early morning police raid. Even the judge, who at first was heralded for ruthlessly pursuing the powerful, now stands accused of breaking the law for releasing evidence from the investigation. The upheaval began 2 years ago when prosecutors discovered a scheme inside the national oil company, Petrobras. Contractors had paid nearly $3 billion in bribes to executives, who in turn channeled money into the campaigns of parties in Brazil's governing coalition. Nearly 40 politicians, business moguls, and black market money dealers have been jailed since, and the list is expected to grow, with prosecutors investigating suspects, including the leaders of both chambers of Congress. Scholars say the corruption scandal ranks among the most far-reaching in the developing world, likening it to an earthquake hitting the nation's privileged elite. It has unspooled alongside crushing economic challenges, as falling commodity prices have set unemployment soaring to 9.5% from 6.8% a year ago. In 2015 alone, Brazil lost 1.5 million jobs, a stunning turnabout from the nation's 7.6% economic growth in 2010. The double whammy of political and economic meltdown has devastated the global ambitions of Latin America's largest nation at the worst possible time. Brazil is simultaneously grappling with an epidemic of birth defects linked to the Zika virus and preparing to host the Olympic Games this summer. That the heart of the scandal is Petrobras, founded in 1953 and surrounded by a mythical nationalistic aura, has only multiplied its ripple effect. The company is the centerpiece of a web of state-controlled energy companies and banks that form the cornerstone of Brazil's economy, projecting power across the nation and abroad. It also financed an array of arts programs, including a symphony orchestra, modern dance troupes, and painting expositions, activities the company has slashed along with its own jobs. Brazilians often joke about corruption's deep roots here, tracing it back to when the Portuguese navigator Cabral arrived in 1500, bearing gifts as a strategy to lay claims to lands inhabited by indigenous peoples. It was only a quarter century ago that another president, Fernando Collor, was forced to resign over an influence peddling scandal, lapse that seemed Bush League in light of what is happening today. It was when Senator Amaral began wrecking the government he once loyally supported that many Brazilians began to grasp how persuasive the skullduggery had become. He testified that De Silva, the former president and founder of the Workers' Party, had arranged to purchase the silence of a businessman convicted of running a vote-buying scheme. He contended that Vice President Temer, who was maneuvering to impeach President Rousseff, was involved in an illegal ethanol purchasing operation. He also targeted the opposition leader, Neves, who narrowly lost the 2014 election, revealing that his family had a secret bank account in Liechtenstein. Before Amaral's decision, Ms. Rousseff had largely managed to stay above the fray. in part by boasting of bolstering judicial independence by allowing prosecutors to pursue graft in their own party. Then the senator claimed that the president had instructed him to sabotage the investigation into the petroleum company by persuading a high-ranking judge to seek the release of construction tycoons charged with corruption. So, Tom, looks like there's a lot of bad stuff there in Brazil.
Well, let's shift over to try to have some good stuff in the state of Nebraska. It says here, fatal accidents down in Nebraska. Fatal accidents in Nebraska are down by nearly half so far this year. From January to March, 34 people died in roadway crashes, compared to 63 deaths for the same period in 2015. According to the Office of Highway Safety, it is the second lowest number of deaths from traffic accidents for the time period since 1946. Nebraska Highway Safety Administrator Fred Zwanchek said he thinks drivers are simply making fewer mistakes. 94% of fatal accidents involve a driver who makes a mistake, he said Friday. So it would stand to reason that hopefully we have drivers who didn't make those mistakes during this time period. Perhaps they're driving a little more carefully. Zwanchek hopes the decline is due to a combination of public information and education targeting young drivers and men ages 18 to 34. Those are the groups who are overrepresented in those crashes, he said. The Office of Highway Safety works with law enforcement, parents, and public health organizations to help spread information regarding safe driving. Our goal is to try to prevent every one of these fatalities, Zwanchek said. We still lost 34 people. Although a goal of 0 fatalities may sound unrealistic, he said it's possible. We have to have the mindset that we are able to prevent these from occurring, he said. We are all responsible for keeping the statistics down and to prevent these from happening. In 2011, 31 fatalities were reported. The next fewest for the period was 1949 with 35 deaths. Fatalities in urban areas are down 53% in 2016 compared to last year, and those in rural areas are down 43%. Dramatic drops in motorcycle and pedestrian fatalities are reported as well. This year, 1 motorcycle death occurred during the first quarter compared to 6 last year. 3 pedestrians died this year on Nebraska roads compared to 6 during the first quarter of 2015. Of the 34 fatalities so far this year, 30 were in passenger vehicles. Of those, Zwanchek said, 7 people were wearing seatbelts. The remaining 23 who weren't. Had they been wearing them, more than half of those people would have likely survived that collision, he said. We still have a problem when 7 out of 10 people are not wearing seatbelts at the time of a crash. Wearing a seatbelt is the simplest, quickest, less intricate thing anyone can do to keep themselves safe while driving, Zwanchek said. You're not always going to be the one who makes the mistake. Someone else may. Meanwhile, the Nebraska State Patrol said Friday it has conducted safety programs at more than 100 locations across the state during the first 3 months of this year, reaching some 18,000 people with the message that seatbelts save lives. Troopers use the seatbelt convincer and driving simulator to show drivers, particularly teen drivers, the value of seatbelts, the patrol said in a news release. Drivers 16 to 20 represent the highest number of unbelted fatalities, the patrol said. We are coming up on a very busy time of the year for our teen drivers, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Schwarten said in the news release. With proms, graduations, and summer celebrations, we hope to reach out to as many groups as possible in an effort to drive home the important role seatbelts play in saving lives. Steve?
Okay, Tom, over to the New York Times, Dateline Malibu, California, some national news here. The high school here is ranked among the best in the country, with students each year moving on to Ivy League colleges. The location on a hill down the block from the beach where Baywatch was filmed offers a multi-million-dollar view of the Pacific Ocean. Yet parents here have been yanking their children out of Malibu High School concerned about PCBs, the highly toxic chemical compounds that have been found in the caulking of the school's windows. The battle over how to handle the PCBs, which were first discovered 3 years ago, is now convulsing this famously wealthy beach community, with parents, television stars, and a supermodel pitted against one of the most elite public school districts in the country. The Santa Monica Malibu United School District insists that its classrooms are safe, and the EPA agrees, but not all parents and teachers are convinced. They blame PCBs for an array of maladies, including migraines, thyroid cancer, and common colds, and they have sued to compel the district to remove all contaminated caulking. A judge ruled last week that the lawsuit could move forward. In the meantime, school board meetings have turned chaotic, with parents shouting down district officials and calling them liars. The school district is telling us our kids are safe, but that's what they were telling parents in Flint, Michigan, said Jennifer DiNicola, a mother of an 8th grader and a 10th grader who has spearheaded the push to remove PCBs. We know there's a problem and they refuse to acknowledge it. But school and health officials insist that simply because PCBs are in the building materials does not mean the students are at risk of exposure. The school district tests the air in classrooms, the primary medium through which children could be exposed, and cleans regularly to reduce dust from the caulking, school officials said. Just because something is present doesn't mean it will cause harm, says Doug Doherty, a managing principal at Ramble Environ, the environmental consulting firm the district has hired. The district has already spent millions of dollars on lawyers, environmental consultants, and a public relations campaign. But this being Malibu, parents have waged their own media campaign, complete with environmental experts and celebrity advocates. Cindy Crawford, the supermodel, has gone on national television to explain why she pulled her 2 children from Malibu High and offered to pay to test caulking for PCBs throughout the campus, which also includes an elementary school and a middle school. Her offer was declined. Video by America Unites for Kids, Cindy Crawford, at the Malibu Unites for PCB. Oh, I see. Okay, so there's a video here in the story. PCBs were widely used in building materials and electronics until they were banned in the late 1970s, and they remain in many older buildings. Research from the Harvard School of Public Health estimated that the substances could be present in upwards of 20,000 schools nationwide. The compounds have been linked to cancer, immune problems, and lower IQs amongst children. Federal law requires that any building materials found to contain PCBs be removed, but to the chagrin of parents here, there was no requirement to test the caulking in the first place. The EPA has endorsed the district's approach to handling the PCBs in its buildings, and scientists who studied PCBs in the New York City schools say this method of testing air quality and cleaning was very effective. Lori Lieberman, the president of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School Board, said that the administration had confidence in the safety of its facilities and had been doing its best to reassure parents. We have tremendous empathy for people who are fearful and scared, Ms. Lieberman said. We've really tried to explain why the schools are safe now. Malibu parents have a history of skepticism about official health advice, including routine childhood vaccinations. At some local elementary schools in 2014, less than 60% of kindergarten students had received the full lineup of recommended vaccines, far below the state average. Tom?
Okay, this is from Lincoln. Harrington settles with city for $5,000, says lawsuit wasn't about money. The city of Lincoln will pay strip club and pornography website owner Shane Harrington $5,000 in an agreement reached Monday to dismiss his lawsuit against several city officials over his failed plans for a downtown nightclub. Harrington filed the federal discrimination lawsuit in 2014, alleging in part that former Lincoln police chiefs Tom Cassidy and Jim Pashong have conservative religious beliefs that led the police department to retaliate and discriminate against Harrington and women with which he works. Their actions, he alleged, influenced the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission's 2011 decision to reject his bid to get a liquor license for a club he opened at 1640 O Street called Smooth. At the license hearing, Cassidy testified he was concerned about Harrington's history and involvement with websites that feature images of people nude in public, which violates city code. Harrington briefly tried to open the club without alcohol, which failed, and he tried to sell it to his manager, but the commission denied a liquor license request from the manager as well. Although he originally sought upwards of $25 million in damages in the lawsuit, Harrington said Monday that money is not the measure of his victory. I just needed to know for me who was behind all of this, he said. I'm good. It no longer bothers me anymore. City Attorney Jeff Kirkpatrick previously described Harrington's allegations as without merit. He couldn't be reached for comment on the settlement Monday. As part of the settlement, the city doesn't admit any fault. Harrington said Monday he plans to run for a seat on the Lincoln City Council next year. Last week, a federal judge dismissed a lawsuit Harrington had filed against Hall County and a number of individuals at two churches, seeking $110 million. He had accused them of defamation, interference with business relationships, and antitrust and constitutional violations. U.S. District Judge John Gerard dismissed the suit Thursday, in part because Harrington didn't have an ownership interest in property affected by Hall County ordinances. Steve, it's yours.
Okay, Tom, some political news from the New York Times. The morning after he lost the Nevada caucuses in February, Bernie Sanders held a painful conference call with his top advisors. He expressed deep frustration that he had not built a stronger political operation in the state, and then turned to the worrisome situation at hand. His strategy for capturing the Democratic presidential nomination was based on sweeping all three early voting states, and he had fallen short, winning only New Hampshire, to the consternation of his wife, Jane, who questioned whether he should have campaigned more in 2005. Without that sweep, his aides thought at the time, Sanders had little hope of overcoming his vast problems with black voters in Southern primaries, and he had no convincing evidence to challenge Hillary Clinton. If Clinton had lost Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, it would have been a devastating series of defeats that would have called into question her entire campaign, said Tad Devine, one of several Sanders advisors who described the February 21 conference call. We had to shift our strategy, but no matter what, the nomination became tougher to win. Sanders is now campaigning more effectively than many expected, exposing Mrs. Clinton's weaknesses as a candidate, and is positioning himself to win contests like the Wisconsin primary. Let's see, that's tomorrow. But allies and advisors of Sanders say they missed opportunities to run an aggressive political operation in 2015 that would have presented more of a challenge to Mrs. Clinton. She has now firmly built a big lead in delegates needed to clinch the nomination, a margin that would be smaller if Sanders had run differently last year, according to interviews with more than 15 people who are on his team or close to him. Despite the urging of some advisors, Sanders refused last fall and early winter to criticize Mrs. Clinton over her $675,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs, an issue that he now targets almost daily. He also gave her a pass on her use of private emails as Secretary of State, even though some allies wanted him to exploit it. And he insisted on devoting time to his job as senator from Vermont last year rather than matching Mrs. Clinton's all-out effort to capture the nomination. Some advisors now say that if he had campaigned more in Iowa, he might have avoided a critical loss there. All of those decisions stemmed in part from Sanders' outlook on the race. He was originally skeptical that he could beat Mrs. Clinton, and his mission in 2015 was to spread his political message about a rigged America rather than to do whatever it took to win the nomination. By the time he caught fire with voters this winter and personally began to believe he could defeat Mrs. Clinton, she was already on her way to building an all but surmountable delegate lead. The Democratic race could yet take unpredictable turns, and his campaign is vowing to win. If Sanders beats Mrs. Clinton in her adopted home state of New York on April 19th, he could raise damaging questions about her candidacy and gain some more momentum. But he would still need to win a landslide victory there and in Pennsylvania, California, and other states to overtake her in delegates this spring. For Sanders, the missteps of 2015 and early 2016 leading to his delegate defeat, are the greatest drag on his recent success. Bob Kerrey, a former Nebraska governor and senator who ran for the Democratic nomination in '92 and who has endorsed Mrs. Clinton in the current race, said Mr. Sanders might be winning now if he had relentlessly pursued Mrs. Clinton since last fall over her closed-door speeches to Wall Street banks, her role in the finances of the Clinton Foundation programs, and other vulnerabilities. Mr. Sanders did not raise the paid speech issue after long resistance until late January. Making the transcripts of the Goldman speeches public would have been devastating to Mrs. Clinton, Kerry said. When the GOP gets done telling the Clinton Global Initiative fundraising and expense story, Bernie supporters will wonder why he didn't do the same. Tom, back over to you.
Okay. Lincoln Public Schools to follow NSAA gender policy, but work with non-athletes its own way. Lincoln Public School officials say the guidelines they follow when working with transgender students will not change regardless of where the Nebraska School Activities Association lands this week on its long-debated policy on sports participation. LPS will follow whatever NSAA policy is in effect, either one that creates a process for transgender students to participate according to their expressed gender, or one that relies solely on birth certificates to define gender, after a Friday vote by the association's representative assembly. But that policy won't drive how the district addresses issues outside of sports competition, says LPS officials. The district will continue to follow guidelines it developed 2 years ago that stress working to meet individual students' needs. We feel this is really a good process in trying to do what's best for the student, says LPS Student Services Director Russ Ewing. We feel this is the way to do it. The guidelines are just that, not a formal policy. And Ewing said they recognize that each student's situation is different. Each one of them is truly unique, he said. And it ranges from they just want to share that they are thinking about transitioning all the way to students that are undergoing some medical procedures. It truly runs the gamut. The guidelines recommend using the student's chosen name and pronoun and creating a plan with the student and parents on when to start using them. In high school, the schools change a student's ID card to reflect his or her chosen name and gender expression, Ewing said. One of the primary reasons for that is to avoid bullying or harassment that could happen if a student's appearance doesn't match his or her ID picture and name. The use of bathrooms and locker rooms, the guidelines say, should be determined on an individual basis. At this time, Ewing said, 3 students are using bathrooms according to their expressed gender, but no transgender students are using locker rooms. We've looked at locker rooms as a different situation simply because of the lack of privacy for everyone, he said. In many cases, it's not an issue because young students don't change clothes for PE class, and middle and high school students, while they may change clothes, rarely shower. Let's see here. Excuse me a minute. I got lost a little bit here in where I'm supposed to be. That's not very good for somebody that's supposed to be reading what something here.
Is it popping up there for you, Tom?
Well, it's here. I just lost the place in the. All right, here we are.
Okay. These darn computers, you know.
Sufficient time heals almost everything. No transgender high school students are playing NSAA sports now, according to the school district. If the current NSAA policy is not changed by the assembly vote Friday, transgender students who do play will be required to use private bathrooms and locker rooms that match their biological gender. Use of locker rooms and bathrooms is one of the most controversial subjects nationally. A suburban Chicago school district recently risked a lawsuit and the loss of millions in federal dollars when the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights found the school had violated Title IX, which bans discrimination based on gender in federally funded education activities, for not letting a transgender student use the locker rooms. The district eventually reached an agreement allowing the student access to private changing stalls installed in the locker rooms. While recent controversies across the country have arisen around high school locker rooms and bathrooms, elementary and middle schools deal with the issue as well. At LPS, the same guidelines apply, said Cindy Schwanger, LPS Director of Elementary Education. We look at the journey the child's been on. We take that information and we plan with students, we plan with parents, she said. Everyone wants their child to be safe. They want their child to be learning. They want them to have friends, and that's what we want. More than a year ago, parents at an elementary school raised concern after a teacher read a children's book to a preschool class at the request of a parent of a gender non-conforming child about a boy who wants to wear a dress to school. The issue arose in the midst of a controversy over teacher training materials on gender identity that got national attention. Now teachers focus on being respectful and accepting of all students rather than addressing transgender or other issues specifically, says John Neal, assistant to the superintendent. LPS uses a behavior program that focuses on teaching students positive behaviors and creating caring classrooms, he said. Treating people respectfully goes beyond any particular issue, he said. There's more focus on respect for all rather than targeting one particular area. Children's books on transgender acceptance are typically kept in a smaller collection of resource books at the district office, not in school media centers, said Director of Library Services, Mary Riemann. The resource books are available to counselors, social workers, or teachers to work with or support individual students. But district officials don't censor librarians who work hard to select books for their schools' collections that meet the needs of their students, she said. LPS guidelines for working with transgender students have evolved in the past 2 years. but LPS has supported transgender students as far back as the 1990s, Neal said. Today's guidelines say schools should accept a student's assertion of his or her gender identity when there is consistent and uniform information of the gender-related identity. That information can come from students and parents, healthcare providers, medical documentation, friends, teachers, and family, although the district doesn't require any specific documentation. Jane Stavin, Associate Superintendent of Instructions, said the guidelines follow the district's overall philosophy. It's a student-centric approach to this, which is how we do things anyway, and it's trying to do what works for students and families. Steve?
Okay, Tom. Science news from the New York Times, talking about this Kennedy Space Center. This is America's busiest spaceport, and the water's coming. Talking about global warming here. Like so much of Florida, the Space Coast, a 72-mile stretch along the Atlantic, is feeling the threat of climate change. Some of the erosion is caused by the churning energy of ocean currents along the coastline. Hurricane Sandy, whose power was almost certainly strengthened by climate change, took a big bite in 2012, flattened an already damaged dune line that had provided protection from the Atlantic's battering. A rising sea level will bring even greater risk over time, and perhaps sooner than most researchers expected. According to a study published last week, warming pressure on the Antarctic ice sheet could help push sea levels higher by as much as 5 or 6 feet by the end of the century. NASA isn't just a victim of climate change. It contributes to climate science in many ways, and not only in the data from many satellites that orbit the planet after leaving Earth from here. Its astronauts also help build awareness of the growing urgency of climate change. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who recently returned from nearly a year in space, took hundreds of photographs that could seem like abstract art or a dire warning. In an email interview just before his descent, he said that he had seen changes in the planet even since his previous mission in 2010. It seems to me there is more pollution in India and China than what I saw last time. Definitely noticed the fires this summer in the USA. Sometimes could see smoke all the way to Chicago. Weather systems where they're not supposed to be obvious, he added. The fragile nature of the atmosphere always apparent. This is quoting Scott Kelly. NASA, which has at least $32 billion worth of structures and facilities around the country, has been considering the possible effects of climate change for nearly a decade, said Kim W. Tufektis, a strategist who leads the master planning program for the space agency. NASA, after all, is in the business of risks management. By 2007, we had to acknowledge that we should recognize climate change and extreme weather as a formal risk that we should actually be managing, he said. With all its expertise and its ability to make forecasts based on data, Tufektis added, shame on us for not capitalizing on that. In fact, NASA's climate change risk extends far beyond Florida. About 2/3 of the land that NASA manages is within 16 feet of mean sea level, and much of it is near the coast. We are tremendously linked to the drink, Tufektis said. Johnson Space Center in Texas sits by Clear Lake, an inlet of Galveston Bay in the Gulf of Mexico. The surge from Hurricane Ike in 2008 caused power failures and debris pileup that shut down the center for a week. The Mashhad assembly plant which built the enormous orange tanks used by the space shuttles, sits on the eastern end of New Orleans and narrowly missed being inundated by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Ames Research Center is near San Francisco Bay. The agency's Client Adaptation Science Investigators Working Group, which evaluates risks for all federal agencies, has predicted that sea level rises of 5 inches to more than 2 feet by 2050 could cause widespread problems for the 5 coastal NASA sites. Tom, I believe you got the obits from the Lincoln Journal-Star.
I do. And we will start with Ashbaugh, Corley Ashbaugh, 79 of York. The funeral is 10 a.m. Wednesday, April 6th at Faith Lutheran Church in York. And the Metz Mortuary in York are handling the arrangements. Axberg, Elmer R. Axberg, 85 of Lincoln. Funeral arrangements are pending. Bartek, James L. Bartek, age 68 from Dwight. Zapka Funeral Homes with the arrangements. And the Mass of Christian Burial at 10:30 a.m. at Assumption Catholic Church. Memorials to the James Bartek family for future designations. Becker, Arlen J. Becker, who's a veteran, age 88 from Exeter. Services are Tuesday at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Exeter. Farmer Funeral Home in Exeter with the arrangements. Memorials are to the Exeter American Legion in lieu of flowers. Berger, Todd Berger, 62 of Wellington, Colorado. In lieu of flowers, consider giving blood or platelets or to the American Cancer Society. And the Vesey Funeral Home funeral service has the arrangements. And they, I believe, are in Fort Collins, Colorado. Bub, Martin Don Bub, 84 of Lincoln, is a vet. He served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. Memorial service is Tuesday at Southwood Lutheran Church. Roper and Sons Funeral Home with the arrangements. And memorials to the Southwood Lutheran Church. Bullock, Tom Bullock, formerly of Lincoln, passed away in Iberia, Ecuador, back on December 29th of last year. An informal celebration of Tom's life will be held from 1 to 3 on Saturday, April 16th in Lincoln. For the location, please visit Memorial Your Tribute, memorial.yourtribute.com/T Bullock. Bundy, Robert L. Bob Bundy, 87. Memorial service at Christ Place Church on Old Cheney Road. Lincoln Family Funeral Care with the arrangements. Carpenter, Michael L. Carpenter, Cortland. That's about all we have for that one. Clifton, Raymond Clifton, 91 of Tecumseh. Funeral services at St. John's Lutheran Church and the Wary Mortuary in Tecumseh with the arrangements. Craigie, Cleo Jean Craigie, 94 of Lincoln. Funeral services will be at the Second Baptist Church in Lincoln. Wyuka Funeral Home with the arrangements. Memorials to American Legion, Auxiliary Unit 3, or Second Baptist Church. Dankenbring, Larry D. Dankenbring, 77 of Hebron. Memorial service at First United Methodist Church in Hebron. Price Funeral Home in Hebron with the arrangements. Memorials to the church or to the American Heart Association. Ernst, Thomas A. Ernst, 74 of Lincoln. Memorial service at First Plymouth Congregational Church, Roper and Sons with the arrangements, memorials to the Nebraska High School Sports Hall of Fame Foundation, Sports Hall of Fame, P.O. Box 460858 in Papillion, Nebraska. And he's going to be cremated, so there'll be no visitation. Flewelling, Randy Lee Flewelling, 56 of Lincoln, celebration of life service on April 9th at the Cornhuskers Social Hall in Lincoln. Memorials to the family. No funeral home mentioned here. Fozzard, it's Fozzard, Doyle Fozzard, 91 of Rising City. Funeral services in Emmanuel Lutheran Church in rural Rising City. Shermock Funeral Home in David City with the arrangements, memorials, and care of the family. Harvey Frederick Rulo, Nebraska, age 73. No other comments other than that. Gustafson, Timothy A. Gustafson, 55 of Lincoln, who's a veteran, served in the U.S. Air Force. Memorial service will be at Indian Hills Community Church. Doesn't give any funeral home. Hoig, H-O-A-G, George Ralph Hoig, 88 of Lincoln. George is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Private family graveside service. Memorials may be given to the Lincoln City Mission in memory of George Hoig. The Lincoln Family Funeral Care is handling the arrangements. Hulbert, Kenneth Lee Hulbert, 86 of Lincoln. He's a U.S. Navy Korean War veteran. Funeral services will be at Southwood Lutheran Church. Memorials to the People's City Mission, 110 Q Street. And let's see, Roper and Son with the arrangements. Keene, Evelyn Patricia Keene in Falls City, Nebraska, age 84. No other information available. Kendrick, Ruth Kendrick, 88 of Albion. Funeral services at Loretto United Methodist Church in Loretto. Lavander Funeral Home in Albion with the arrangements. Lee, Fern L. Lee, Waverly, formerly of Lincoln, age 88. No other information. Mahemken, that's M-E-H-M-K-E-N, Roy E. Mahemken, age 70. No other information. Meyer, Richard G. Meyer, 85 of Lincoln, and he was a vet, and funeral services will be at the Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home in Lincoln. Nathan, Rupert G. Nathan, 81 of Fullerton. Services at St. Peter's Catholic Church. Burial with military rites will follow at St. Peter's Catholic Cemetery in Fullerton. Palmer Santon Funeral Home with the arrangements. Oldemeyer, Virgil H. Oldemeyer, 83. Metcalf Funeral Home with the arrangements, and that would be in Firth. But the memorial service is Monday, April 4th, today, at Lincoln Berean Church in Lincoln. Memorials may be given to the family for future designation. Parsons, Kempton Claire Parsons, infant daughter of Michaela Wagner Parsons and Travis Parsons of Lincoln. Butherus Major Funeral Home with the arrangements, private family service. Memorials may be made to the family for future designation. Peterson, Eleonora Ellie Larson Peterson, 94, formerly of Cordova, Friend, and Crete. Funeral services, Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church in Cordova. Lauber Moore Funeral Home in Friend with the arrangements. Memorials to Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church or in care of the family. Radford, Lola M. Radford, 80 of Seward. Services at St. John's Lutheran Church in Seward. Volsky Funeral Home with the arrangements, and they're in Seward. Raymer, Douglas Lee Raymer, 55 of Crete. Was in the National Guard for 8 years. Let's see here. Funeral services will be at the First Lutheran Church in Wilbur. For flower or plant memorials, please send to the house. And I guess it looks like it's Aspen Aftercare with the arrangements. Rash, Arlene Jane Rash, age 97. Private family service will be held at Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home. Saz, that's S-A-H-S, funeral services for John Saz will be held at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Lincoln. John Saz Memorials, care of Larson Tractor Museum Friends, Post Office Box 830833 in Lincoln, or to Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Doesn't list a funeral home here. Skoda, Lillian M. Skoda, 74 of Lincoln. Services pending at Wyuka Funeral Home. She was 74. I didn't mention that. Thompson, Clarence Ray Thompson, 86 of Lincoln, who's a vet, served in the Army in Korea during 1950 through 1952. Graveside services will be held at Lincoln Memorial Park and Funeral Home in the Four Apostles area. Family will meet at Gate 2. Again, no funeral home mentioned. Wirtz, that's W-E-E-R-T-S, Wirtz, Michael G. Wirtz, 68 of Beatrice. Memorial services at the First Baptist Church of Beatrice, and the body will be at Lyon State Fox Funeral Home. Burial with military rites conducted by the Bidding Norman Post number 27 of the Beatrice American Legion. Will be held at the Fairbury Cemetery. And finally, Zangari, Dominic Mick Zangari, 70 of Lincoln. Celebration of life will be held on Friday, April 8th at St. Mark's United Methodist Church. Donations in Mick's memory are suggested to the Heartland Cancer Foundation or to the charitable organization of the donor's choice.
And listener memorials to Radio Talking Book are tax deductible and will go a long way in keeping us on the air. Please keep the Radio Talking Book network in mind when memorials are listed as a donor's choice or your favorite charity. Donations should be sent to Radio Talking Book Network, 7101 Newport Avenue, Suite 205, Omaha, 68152. And we're going to send it back to Emily for our 7 o'clock break.
All right.
I figured, heck with it.
Didn't even give you time.
Oh, they read them this morning, so.
Okay, I should be able to find the, somewhere in here, the editorial page.
Well, I'm going to let you kick it off because I got to go use the cans.
Okay, fair enough. I'll find something.
Otherwise, I'm going to swim out of here.
Okay.
Play a big role in controlling our environmental pollution. As the water comes down, it's going to be filtered through these layers of
This is
soil.
for the editorial.
Every drop of water
Where is
that we
the
drink
menu?
has gone through a piece of soil.
Understanding. Sports and business, entertainment, lifestyle, opinion. That'll be something that there must be a letter.
Ointment that has been used to treat cattle for their ticks around the turn of the century. They used to have these dipping baths, filling the bath with the aqueous solution and dipping the cattle to clean them. After they're done, they would take that solution and put it on the soil next to the dipping bath. Little did they know that that action is going to cause that poison arsenic to stay in the soil for a really long time. We came in with a desire to understand how long is that poison going to be stuck on that soil. Is it going to come off if it rains? If it comes off, is it going to go all the way into the water? So after looking at that contamination, unfortunately we had some bad news to report. Arsenic is going to stick to to the post on the radio outside. And in terms of possibilities of cleaning up, there's not many options because of how strong they cling to each other.
The best solution, of course, is to not dump poisons, but if they must be disposed of in a landfill, current thinking is to line the landfill with clay and oxides that attract and hold poisons like arsenic. Also, the findings made possible in part by the Center for Earth and Environmental Nanotechnology and the National Science Foundation.
All right. That brings us back from our break. I want you to remember this is your Radio Hospital Network, your print information network, serving Nebraska and its neighboring states. The Radio Talking Book Network is brought to you with cooperation from KIOSFM in Omaha and statewide in any radio network. So it looks like both Steve and Tom are ready and ready to go for another round of live reading. So I'm going to hand it on over to the gentlemen in the studio, and they're going to get right back on your live reading for you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I will start with the Lincoln Journal-Star. This is an editorial by, excuse me, Leonard Pitts Jr. from the Miami Herald. About 20 years ago, when the syndicate that represents this column was preparing to pitch it to newspaper editors, I was called in for a meeting with the sales staff, and somebody asked me this question: are you a liberal or are you conservative? I said, yes. I wasn't trying to be a wise guy. Okay, maybe a little. But I was also trying to convey my impatience with our bipolar political discourse, with the idea that I was required to pick a team. I was trying to preserve for myself the right to think a thing through and come to my own conclusion regardless of ideological branding. But at the same time, I knew what I was being asked. When they said, are you liberal or are you conservative? Those words had concrete meaning, embodied real political concepts. But that is no longer the case, at least where the latter term is concerned. Once upon a time, when a person identified as a conservative, you knew the ideas he or she meant to convey: low taxes, small government, resistance to social change. But a word that once encoded a definite set of values and beliefs now seems utterly bereft of internal cohesion, less a name for an ideology than for a mood: surly, nasty, and put upon. They don't like the rest of us, nor do they seem to like each other all that much, feuding with a bitterness and constancy that would make even the Hatfields and McCoys tell them to tone it down. Yes, ideology still gets lip service, but its importance has become secondary, if that. How else do you explain that people who once considered Christian faith their foundation stone have coalesced behind a candidate who can't name a Bible verse? Or that people who once valued a grown-up, clear-eyed approach to foreign policy support candidates who want to carpet bomb the Middle East and pull out of NATO? Or that people who once decried a culture of victimization now whine all day about how they are victims of biased media, bullying gays, and political correctness? How to explain that people who once vowed to safeguard American moral decency from the nefarious irreverence of liberals? Think President Bush chastising the Simpsons in the era of family values. Now put forth candidates who tell penis jokes. A few days ago, New York Times columnist David Brooks professed to be excited by this act of self-immolation. This is a wonderful moment to be a conservative, he gushed, because after this debacle, conservatives will be able to reinvent themselves, unencumbered by existing mental categories and presuppositions. Like when a comic book or movie franchise gets rebooted, I suppose. One had the sense of a man desperately painting lipstick on a pig. The right is rotting from within, putrefying on its own grievance and rage. It seems bereft of core values and beliefs unless you count its determination to always oppose anything the left supports, up to and including motherhood and sunshine. That's as close to principle as conservatives come these days. Given the way they have spurned the party's 2012 election autopsy report, which called for greater inclusion and a gentler tone, one wonders if these folks are capable of, or even interested in, the reinvention Brooks predicts. Conservatives do not need to be liberal light. No ideology has a monopoly on good ideas. On the other hand, when your base is the Ku Klux Klan, Ted Nugent, and people sucker punching strangers at rallies, it's a sign that a little self-reflection is overdue. Are you liberal, or are you conservative? I had a smart aleck answer 20 years ago, but it occurs to me that if they asked me that now, I'd have to request clarification. My worldview hasn't changed, but I no longer have any idea what conservative means. Steve?
Opinion section of the New York Times, they have a thread of editorials on is China's policy towards North Korea changing. This is from Ali Wynn, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. President Obama and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, are set to discuss North Korea's recent raft of provocations when they meet on the sidelines of the fourth nuclear security summit being held in Washington this week. In response to North Korea's nuclear test in January, the fourth to date, and its long-range rocket launch in February, the United Nations Security Council voted unanimously this month to enact a new round of sanctions on the regime. The far-reaching measure mandates that all North Korean cargo-carrying planes and vessels be inspected, bans the North from exporting most of its natural resources, including coal, and prohibits countries from selling it aviation fuel and small arms. Evidently unconcerned about such impositions, North Korea fired 5 short-term projectiles off its east coast March 21st. China, meanwhile, feels increasingly trapped by 3 considerations. 1, the recognition that North Korea is reliably erratic and largely immune to diplomatic intervention, prepared to ignore China's private remonstrations and destabilize the Asia-Pacific region on a whim. 2, the widespread perception, which Beijing dismisses, that it could rein in North Korea if only it were to exercise the prodigious leverage it has over its neighbors' trade and investments. And 3, the imperative of preventing North Korea's collapse. While China is increasingly frustrated with the regime's behavior, the third of those considerations still appears to play a decisive role in its calculus. The implosion of North Korea could create an exodus of 25 million refugees, increasing significantly the prospect of a reunified Korea that is allied with the United States and facilitate negotiations over the deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile System to the Korean Peninsula. Consider as well the possibility of atomic weapons and fissile material no longer under government command and control, a concern shared universally, not simply in Northeast Asia. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned earlier this month that blind faith in sanctions and pressure is not a responsible approach. He added, crucially, that China will not sit idly by and watch stability on the peninsula be destroyed. Accordingly, while China will likely accede to growing diplomatic and economic pressures on North Korea, if more out of reputational considerations than strategic ones, it will not do so beyond the threshold at which it believes its conception of regional order should be endangered. And then another one of the threads of editorial in the New York Times. This is China's patience with North Korea is wearing thin. Sue Mi Terry, managing director for Bauer Group Asia, is a former senior North Korea analyst with the CIA. There's evidence, growing and incomplete, but nevertheless credible, that China's patience with North Korea is wearing thin, particularly in the aftermath of North Korea's fourth nuclear test in January 2016. Beijing appears to be doing more today to enforce international sanctions against North Korea than in the past. It has instructed Chinese companies that trade with North Korea to stop importing coal, a key feature of the United Nations Security Council sanctions, although some Chinese buyers are still reportedly accepting North Korea's coal. North Korean ships are lingering offshore waiting to offload, a delay that disrupts North Korea's finances. There is even a report that China has cut off flour exports to the North, and that's not an item banned by the United Nations and not a staple of the North Korean diet, but nevertheless an important item. Without flour, North Korea will not be able to make children's treats for the upcoming Kim Jong-un will not be able to make children's treats for his upcoming birthday of his grandfather and state founder on April 15th. This will be at a minimum a source of annoyance and embarrassment for the regime. Another sign of Chinese exasperations with North Korea, Chinese president has yet to meet with Kim 4.5 years later after his ascendance, whereas he has met with South Korea's president on numerous occasions. If there has indeed been a change of attitude on Beijing's part, it can be ascribed to a number of causes. Recent secondary sanctions imposed by the U.S. are expected to hurt Chinese banks and businesses that do business with North Korea. If the choice is between trading with North Korea and trading with the U.S., the answer is obvious. Beijing is also not happy about the fact that the growing North Korean missile threat is leading Seoul to give serious consideration to joining the U.S.'s Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Initiative, which would tie South Korea even closer to the U.S. None of this is sufficient for Beijing to entirely abandon its long-standing strategy of subsidizing North Korea as a buffer against the encroachment of U.S. power on its border. But these are signs that Beijing's thinking may slowly be changing. It may no longer be willing to grant a blank check to the Kim regime. If North Korea becomes more of a strategic liability for China in the future, a more fundamental rethinking of China's policy is possible. Tom?
Okay, here's an editorial from the Lincoln editorial staff. Tap water to appreciate. The scandal of lead-tainted water flowing from taps in Flint, Michigan, drove home the lesson that no one can take the safety of their drinking water for granted. This year, there's little doubt that Lincoln residents are more interested than usual in the annual report on testing of the water that comes from local faucets. The results are reassuring, and an examination of how the testing is done locally also calms worries about the safety of the local water supply. No one is hiding their head in the sand. This year, the measurement of arsenic in the water ticked upward. No one wants arsenic in their drinking water. Although it's still below the level deemed safe by federal authorities, the city plans to hire a consultant to analyze whether the increase should be viewed as a trend that will continue and to suggest ways to deal with the problem. Arsenic levels in Lincoln's drinking water, which comes from well fields in the Platte River near Ashland, have gone up and down over the years. This year, the water from vertical wells contained 6.9 parts per billion. Water from the newer horizontal wells came in at 9.8 parts per billion. The EPA safety standard is 10 parts per billion. In contrast to Flint, Lincoln water system officials have a long history of making testing results public. A summary test result of the test results will be included in residents' water bills, along with information on how to view the full report. As Judy Halstead, director of the Lincoln Lancaster Health Department, put it, you could be in Flint, Michigan, and not pay attention, or in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we hire a consultant for something that is just likely a blip. Before water is sent through Lincoln's water mains, it is disinfected with ozone technology and chlorine and filtered. Consumers who turn to bottled water out of an excess of caution should be advised that Lincoln's water supply is tested more regularly. A bottled water plant, for example, is required to test only once a week for coliform bacteria. Lincoln's water supply is tested several times a day. Staffers in the Lincoln water system take pride in their product. In 2014, From Lincoln's Taps was judged the best tasting in the state, displacing Fremont, which often claims the top spot. In 2009, Lincoln Water placed third in the annual national taste competition organized by the American Waterworks Association. When it comes to quality drinking water, Lincoln is the envy of many communities. Let's hope water system officials can keep it that way. Steve?
Okay, over to the arts section of the New York Times. It may be the biggest unfiring in opera since Maria Callas' New York comeback. Kathleen Battle, a prima donna whose dismissal by the Met more than 2 decades ago made front page news, will return to the Met next season to sing a recital of spirituals. The concert scheduled for November 13th will provide a burst of old school star power at a time when the Met has been struggling with declining attendance. Arrangements for her appearance came after Ms. Battle, 67, was courted by Peter Gelb, the company's general manager. I think great artists should be on the stage of the Met, Mr. Gelb said in an interview. There aren't enough of them. Miss Battle was a Grammy-winning soprano who had appeared with the Met 224 times in 1984 when Joseph Volpe, then general manager, fired her from a production a week before opening night, citing with a bluntness unusual in classical music her unprofessional actions during rehearsals. Stories quickly circulated about what was described as diva-like behavior and rudeness towards colleagues, including demands that other singers leave rehearsals when she was singing and not look at her mouth during duets. Miss Battle was said to arrive late to rehearsals, leave early, or to not show up at all. Nor was Philly the first case, the opera she was fired from, the first case of her being temperamental. The year before, she withdrew from a Met production after clashing with the conductor. A few months before that, in a season opening appearance with the Boston Symphony, she was said to have changed hotels several times and banned an assistant conductor from her rehearsals. I was not told by anyone of the Met about any unprofessional action, she said in a statement after being fired, adding, "All I can say is I am saddened by this decision." Her dismissal and return calls to mind past tempestuous clashes between opera divas and impresarios. Calais, one of the greatest sopranos of the 20th century, was fired by the Met in 1958 after a dispute over which roles she would agree to sing. She too was rehired in 1965 and returned to give 2 final Met performances. which are considered legendary. She will give a recital called Kathleen Battle Underground Railroad, a spiritual journey accompanied by Joel Martin on the piano and by a choir led by James Davis Jr., the director of music ministries and fine arts at a Baptist church in Harlem. Miss Battle, who has performed versions of the program in Philadelphia, Detroit, and Baltimore, has said she is excited to be back at the Met, Tom.
I have a frozen computer, I'm afraid. Let's see here.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can find something else. You might want to try, just maybe exiting out of Safari and see if you have to reboot or something.
It talks about MacKeeper.
Oh, yeah.
I can quit Safari.
Yeah, go to the Apple thing at the top.
Yeah.
The little Apple icon. Okay, well, and then try force quit. See if there's anything there you can force quit. That'll sometimes do it. We'll just see if you can force quit everything. I'll find something else. Let's see. This is also from the arts section. A review of Royal Shakespeare Company's King and Country. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. Those celebrated words spoken by King Henry VIII may serve as a fitting epitaph for King and Country, Shakespeare's great cycle of kings, a sweeping superlative presentation of 4 history plays. Both parts of Henry VIII, bookend by Richard II and Henry V, but by the Royal Shakespeare Company at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. You might also try rebooting it. Oh, it came back. Okay.
Well, we'll see.
Is it working for you?
Well, we'll see here.
Okay.
I think it might.
Not until the hard-won triumph of Henry V over the French, establishing the kingdom as a unified entity at last, does a monarch depicted in these great plays have an entirely comfortable day at court or possibly even a good night's sleep. The second and more widely known of Shakespeare's 2 history terologies, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I know. The cycle charts the tumult that roils the British kingdom under 3 successive rulers. Working for you, Tom?
Well, yeah, I've got an article here.
Okay, that's fine. I'm doing tech support and reading a review of the Shakespeare play. I think that makes me a multitasker.
Well, and doubles your pay.
Doubles my pay, that's right, for us volunteers here. To see the plays together and in sequence naturally emphasizes the continuity of the history they unfold. But more than this, one comes away with a fresh awe of the infinite variety that Shakespeare and no other dramatist captured. Robust comedy, feeling, psychology, a grasp of dramatic tension and momentum, and above all, the thrilling alchemy of life and thought transferred into poetry. All 4 productions, generally in traditional dress and featuring handsome minimalist sets, are directed by Gregory Doran, and while they are among these mighty 12 hours of theater, inevitably some sluggish patches, the overall achievement here, which includes one of the greatest performances I've ever seen, Antony Sher's Falstaff, is nothing short of magnificent, a testament to the company's welcome return to the top of form after its last visit to New York in 2011, when it presented most unremarkable productions of 5 plays. So these are much better, and he's liking the stuff that's going on there, Tom.
Okay, back to the highlights of Lincoln. Noisy restaurants frustrate Lincoln diners. Catherine Endicott and her husband Richard used to enjoy eating out. So much so, they wrote 2 dining books, Eating Nebraska, 1990, and Second Helpings, More Eating Nebraska, in 1996. That's not the case today for the local couple. In responding to a Facebook post from the Journal Star asking about loud restaurants, Catherine Endicott, 66, called noise levels very frustrating, especially in fine dining establishments in Lincoln. We do not eat out regularly anymore because the experience is poor, she said. We would go out more often if there was a quiet place with first-rate food. She's not alone. The following is a rundown of Facebook, Twitter, and email comments from other local diners about loud restaurants. A noisy restaurant makes conversation difficult and, as far as I am concerned, degrades the enjoyment of even outstanding food. Noise is a prevailing problem for many of us. Rooms are poorly designed and furnished, music is piped in, conversational levels increase to compensate. The result is a noisy environment that is unpleasant and difficult for many of us. The sports bars here in Lincoln are the worst. For some reason, they seem to think that the volume has to be up to full blast all the time. My husband and I are so done with these restaurants with polished concrete floors. I don't even have hearing aids and can barely have a conversation with a person across the table. It's easier to say where you have not experienced too much noise. And my favorite, in a large group at a noisy restaurant, I tend to nod a lot and hope I haven't agreed to watch someone's dog for the weekend. Restaurant noise is a national issue as well. Zagat surveyed more than 9,000 diners across the country for its 2016 report, asking them, among other things, for their dining irritants and pet peeves. Noise, 25%, was second behind service, 28%. It was number one in cities including Portland, Oregon, 33%, New York City, 32%, Boston, 30%, and San Francisco, 26%. Interestingly, a San Francisco newspaper publishes decibel levels with its dining reviews and has done so for more than 10 years. This came in the wake of a 2000 study by two audiologists at the University of California in San Francisco, who measured noise levels in 5 different San Francisco restaurants and found average levels range from 50 to 90 decibels on the A scale, an expression of the relative loudness of sounds in air as perceived by the human ear. Normal conversation is 45 to 50 dBA, and in some cases, the noise level reached 110 dBA, comparable to a loud dance club. So why are restaurants so loud? University of Nebraska Lincoln engineering professor and acoustic specialist Lily Wang said it comes down to materials and layout. Restaurants no longer use noise-dampening soft furniture, tablecloths, and carpeting, opting instead for easy-to-maintain concrete floors, high ceilings, large windows, and contemporary wood and metal furnishings. Open kitchens with chefs and cooks banging and clanging their pots and pans also are in vogue. After a restaurant is open and have had complaints that it's too loud, they'll come and ask me if there's some magical material they can spray on, Wang said. My answer to that is no. It's going to be costly at that point. A diner's age also is a factor, Wang said, noting it's a very common thing for people to begin losing their high-frequency hearing. The National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders say age-related hearing loss, or proboscis, gradually occurs in most people as they age. It is one of the most common conditions affecting older and elderly adults. Approximately 1 in 3 people in the U.S. between 65 and 74 has hearing loss, and nearly half of those older than 75 have hearing difficulty, according to the Institute. As we get older, we're much more aware of noise, Wang said. Many Lincoln restaurants realize noise is an issue, and many of them have addressed it. Marcy Davidson said Carmela's Bistro and Wine Bar was so darn loud we couldn't hear the customers when she opened it in June 2008. It was driving us crazy. At the time, the restaurant featured slick concrete, blank walls, and high ceilings. The sound didn't know where to go, said Davison, who installed ceiling tiles, sound panels, curtains, and rugs after consulting with a sound technician. There's still some chatter, but you can't hear the conversation next to you anymore. Venue, restaurant, and lounge with its domed ceiling and open kitchen was notorious among diners for noise. Darn that venue, one diner wrote in a Twitter post. Great food, nice looking, but can get quite loud. Co-owner Jeff Barkley recently hired a company to deal with the problem. Within the past 4 months, Venue has installed soundboards in the domed dining area as well as in the server station. We're definitely on a mission, said Barkley. We want to figure this out. Jason Shaw's Lincoln Company DTX Digital Theater experts addressed sound problems at Toast in Fallbrook, Mr. Good Sense at 16th Street, and Old Cheney Road and Scooters at 84th and Van Dorn Streets. A musician, Shaw said he's more picky about noise than most people. I'm always listening. When you're going out to eat, you're going for the experience, not just the food. You often pay a lot of money for that. It's not very enjoyable if you can't hear the conversation or the waiter or the background music. DTX installed sound-absorbing acoustic panels at Toast, which has cement floors, large windows, and high ceilings. Co-owner Wendy Young said they have helped. I've gotten feedback from our guests, and we have a lot of regulars at Toast, and they say it's much more comfortable now, Young said. But, she said, you don't want it too quiet either. Venues Barkley agreed. We love our ambiance, he said. Guests love the ambiance. The trick is finding the right amount of noise that isn't too distracting. You don't want to dampen all the noise. That's part of the experience and the environment. Catherine Endicott and her husband get that. Dining out is supposed to be social, but it can be difficult to be social when you can't hear the person across from you. We are staying and entertaining more at home now because it's quieter and easier to talk, she said. The whole point is spending time with the people we care about. Dining at some places makes it difficult. Boy, I wish it were the other way.
Steve? What? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know. I find one and it goes on forever.
Yeah, well, those concrete floors, and restaurants used to have drop ceilings.
Yeah.
Now they don't. So that really makes it tough.
It does.
Style section from the New York Times. These days, Gwyneth Paltrow, the actress, 43 years old, is perhaps better known for her website Goop.com, where New Age meets wellness meets urban bourgeoisie. Not content with just content, she has developed makeup products with Juice Beauty and has introduced her Goop skincare line. She has kids named Apple, 11, and Moses, 9, lives in LA. And she's going to share some beauty, hair, and life advice. In general, I love serums and face oils and body oils. I'm a real oil kind of girl. This is Gwyneth talking now.
Okay, not you. I got it.
There is a myth that oil is not good for your skin. I don't believe it at all. So lately, I've been using my Instant Facial. It has some gentle fruit acids in it, and you feel it go active because there's a little tingle and see great results. There are also some beads in it, and it leaves me glowy. I think you're supposed to use it only 3 times a week, but I've been using it more. I use it as a day or night cream. Let's see, what else does Gwyneth Paltrow use? Sometimes I use a clarifying mask. I like this blue one by May Lindstrom. And she talks about what others. She only uses mineral sunscreens, never the chemical ones. My wife, if she was listening, she'd understand all this. She loves Tammy Fender body oil. It has a lavender scent. And Organic Pharmacy has a body oil she likes. She also likes Ursa Major face wipes.
Okay.
Yeah. She doesn't wear much makeup during the day. She goes out with just mascara and a little cheek. I don't use bronzer. All right. She collects fragrances. Talks about what she uses for shampoo and conditioner. I'm a guinea pig to try everything. I like to try them all. I love acupuncture. Also, I've heard of a service called a sound bath, which might be too hippie-ish, even for the likes of me. It's a new healing modality. But I'm open to everything. I've been stung by bees. All righty. I know we're not supposed to make editorial comments, so. But I've never been stung by bees intentionally.
Yeah.
I got chased by some into a lake when I was a kid. Just like in the cartoons. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I definitely believe in exercise being an important part of your routine. I'm a diehard Tracy Anderson fan. I do boxing occasionally. I have a membership in a boxing gym, but I haven't gone there since Christmas. But I have an easier philosophy than I did 10 years ago. So some beauty advice from Gwyneth Paltrow. She looks pretty good.
Yeah.
You know? So
Easy for them to say.
yeah. So anyhow, you got any? Was it time for the business news?
It is.
Yeah.
I'm seeking some of that as we speak. I'll start this, and it says, this is called Ask Vicky. What are some good questions to ask a prospective company? Okay, you might start with these 4, which will help you keep selling yourself even when the interview portion of the interview is done. But also keep in mind that some of the best questions to ask are specific and relevant to the job, the company, and the industry. The more focused your questions, the more informative the answers you will receive. Check out the company's social media profiles and the press section of its website for the latest development. You know, are there rumors the firm will be acquired? Or maybe it recently took over another company? How will that impact its growth? You can position the question by demonstrating you did your research and also that you're downright curious. For example, I read about your company potentially merging with XYZ. Just curious, is that true? And how would that impact this department? A few other good ones? Ask the interviewer where he or she sees the department and company headed in terms of projects, responsibilities, and headcount within the next 2 to 5 years. Also ask about the current position you're interviewing for. Why is it available? Did someone resign, get promoted, or is the department expanding? And find out about what traits, skills, and experiences they are looking for in an excellent candidate, and how will they further develop those skills. Finally, here's one you should ask in every interview. Why do you like it here, besides the people? Forced to avoid what's typically the most common answer, the hiring manager should give you some interesting insights into the company. So that's, you probably have more business goodies than I do with the
Well, the New York Times, yeah, they're just full of business news. Dateline LA, Thomas O. Staggs, the favorite contender to lead Disney after Robert Iger's retirement, unexpectedly announced his departure on Monday, throwing succession at the world's largest entertainment company into disarray. Staggs, who became Walt Disney's #2 exec last year, beating out other candidates, will step down as COO on May 6th. Disney said that Staggs, age 55, would remain an employee until fall, serving as a special advisor to Iger, the CEO. In a statement, Iger called Staggs a great friend and trusted colleague. Disney has a history of bumpy transitions of power, and last year when Staggs was elevated to COO from theme park chairman, Disney insisted it was not a coronation. Disney acknowledged, however, that the promotion made him Iger's handpicked heir, pending board approval. Iger's 65. He said he was going to step down in June 2018. After the promotion, Staggs came under increased scrutiny by Disney's board, and it became clear that some board members were not convinced he had the skills to maintain creative momentum. Staggs has extensive financial experience, but his resume is light when it comes to successful creation of movies and television shows. Iger ran ABC early in his career. An early personal misstep did not help Staggs. He pushed for a theme park marketing executive, Leslie Ferraro, to become Disney's merchandising chairman. Ms. Ferraro proved a poor fit and left Disney in February. Staggs also lacks support of some Disney shareholders. Disney prefers to promote from within, but Staggs was the only obvious candidate, and he beat everybody else out. The board may look outside for a successor to Iger, who led Disney to record-breaking results. Left with no guidance from Disney, Hollywood instantly began to guess about potential candidates on Monday, with a member of Disney's board, Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg, frequently mentioned. In a statement, Disney said the board will broaden the scope of its succession planning process to identify and evaluate a robust slate of candidates for consideration. And Iger said he doesn't want to stay on. As roughly two years remain before Iger steps down, there is still ample time to find a replacement, and we think Iger could potentially delay his exit if need be, said one analyst. Succession turmoils happened at Disney before. Remember Michael Eisner, when he turned over control to Iger in 2005, the changeover became an example of what not to do. Roy Disney, the nephew of Walt, used the lack of succession planning in a public attack on Eisner. A decade earlier, Disney endured a lesser degree of succession strife when Jeffrey Katzenberg, who resigned as chairman of Walt Disney Studios after Eisner refused to promote him to president of the broader company. Over the last year, Staggs devoted a substantial amount of his time to Disney Media Networks, a division that includes ESPN, ABC, and Disney Channel. The end of the road for Staggs who has many supporters at Disney, comes as the company prepares to unveil the $5.5 billion Shanghai Disney Resort, a project of such crucial importance that Staggs helped guide it as the theme park chairman. So stuff going on at Disney there, Tom.
Okay. Well, let's shift over to the sports part of the evening. And for all you Husker fans, which is most of the state, I would guess,
Yeah.
Here's good news. Huskers get their quarterback commit. Gebbia is in. Nebraska got their man. For the second straight recruiting class, the Huskers have pulled arguably the best quarterback recruit out of the state of California. Patrick O'Brien last cycle, Tristan Gebbia this one. It appeared to be down to Nebraska and Ole Miss for Gebbia. Four-star quarterback Tristan Gebbia visited both campuses last week, collecting some last-minute thoughts before announcing on Monday the Huskers were the choice. The quarterback is a key part of what Husker fans have taken to calling the Calabasas crew, joining wide receiver teammate Keyshawn Johnson Jr. as pledges to this Husker class from high school in California. Four-star cornerback Markel Dismuke of Calabasas also signed with the Big Red in February. The Huskers were believed to have a good chance at Gebbia for a while now, but Ole Miss was viewed as a strong competitor since the quarterback's father had played there. Standing 6'3" and 180 pounds, Gebbia is ranked number 86 nationally among all players by Rivals.com, the fourth best at his position. He is ranked 156th nationally by 24/7 Sports and 237th by Scout. All the sites rank him as the best pro-style quarterback out of the state of California. Last fall, he led his team to a 13-2 record, throwing for 4,433 yards with 45 touchdown passes to only 9 interceptions. Gebbia is Nebraska's fourth commit of the 2017 class, joining teammate Johnson, wide receiver Javon McCourty out of Columbia, Missouri, and linebacker Willie Hampton from West Palm Beach, Florida. So that's a pretty good get.
Yeah, after Keyshawn Johnson Jr., of course, as Tom Osborne said a number of years ago when somebody told him, he had a good recruiting class, what did he think of it? He said, "Well, ask me in 5 years, and I'll tell you how good it was." Of course, Villanova tonight against North Carolina for the NCAA championship. The game begins at 8:20. Now, I kind of thought that Jim Carlson, who's normally here on Monday night, Tom, was skipping because he's a big basketball fan. But, we got 20 minutes to get home. So
That's right.
Maybe he had a real reason. Not that basketball's not a real reason, but dominance is not a word associated with any college basketball team this season. But in March, two teams clearly established themselves as a cut above the rest. That makes the national title showdown between North Carolina and Villanova especially compelling tonight. They have both managed to arrive here playing their best basketball, and it's hard to project which version is better. The Tar Heels, number one seed from the East region, are certainly looking very impressive. They have yet to win an NCAA tournament game by fewer than 14 points. The lack of any close calls in this tournament, while so many other favorites went down, demonstrates just how strong this Carolina team is. Their size and speed getting up and down the court has been overwhelming. It seems like the only thing they can't do is shoot three-pointers, although they got hot last night against Syracuse. But arguably, no team has performed as remarkably as Villanova, number 2 seed from the South, which was expected to have a rough time against Oklahoma on Saturday, and they just blew them out totally. The Wildcats have a balanced scoring attack, and their defense was magnificent against Oklahoma. But assistant coach Baker Dunleavy admitted the team has not yet faced an opponent like North Carolina. I don't think any team we've played thus far has this type of size, Dunleavy said. Before the national anthem was played ahead of the South Regional Final, the Villanova senior Ryan Archicano muttered to several teammates lined up within earshot, "Let's do what we have to do." But then Villanova did something it does not often do. They went big with lanky redshirt freshman Mikal Bridges playing more minutes than usual, and 6'11" Daniel Ochefu and 6'8" Daryl Reynolds playing at the same time for a stretch. But regardless of how the Wildcats line up, this is a Villanova team sure of its identity. The players fancy themselves as a hard scrabble group of East Coast grinders. They pride defense above offense, and they have the survive and advance mentality that allowed them to advance to the Final Four as a number 2 seed. It all starts with Archicano, Arch as they call him, the senior point guard, who is Villanova's career leader in games played and something of an on-court extension of Jay Wright, the team's coach since 2001. Arch has the chip on his shoulder, but he's also got huge hands and a deadly shot. Ochefu was one of the country's top recruits. Josh Hart and Chris Jenkins are talented wing players. North Carolina guard Nate Britt said he had no idea where his parents are going to be seated inside NRG Stadium for the national title game Monday night, or what colors they intend to wear. It might be a carefully thought out decision. It's because Britt's family also includes Villanova guard Chris Jenkins, who they legally adopted in 2007. Britt and Jenkins, both juniors, grew up as siblings in Maryland, tracing nearly identical basketball pathways to an intersection on the college game's biggest stage. Their connection is so tight that Jenkins attended North Carolina's game against Notre Dame in the East Regional Final, seated directly behind the Tar Heels bench. The brothers embraced and took selfies on the court after Carolina's win. It was a special moment, Jenkins said. I told him how proud I was of him and that we're going to keep going so we can get to the point where we are now. Now that they're here, the two players have not spoken since Carolina's game ended Saturday night. I was a Carolina fan, Jenkins said, until last night. Tom, you got anything?
Well, I've got a little something here that from the basketball world for Nebraska, and it talks about Heald, a Husker, the Oklahoma Star. Sadler recalls OU star recruitment, and this is Doc Sadler remembers driving to Wichita, Kansas to visit a player. His assistant coach, Wes Flanagan, had begun recruiting before virtually anyone else had. Excuse me. Twice Sadler, then the Nebraska men's basketball coach, waited late at night at the gymnasium at Sunrise Christian Academy. One time was after 10 p.m. and the other, the clock was approaching midnight. Both times, Buddy Heald finally ceased his workout to talk with Sadler. He was a workaholic, that's for sure, Sadler said this week. Heald even took 2 unofficial visits to Nebraska. So exactly how close were the Huskers to landing Heald? You'd have to ask him, I guess, Sadler said, but I thought we were in there pretty good. Yep. Heald, of course, chose Oklahoma, and last week was named the winner of the Oscar Robertson Trophy, presented annually to the National Player of the Year. He also led the Sooners to their 5th Final Four, although Oklahoma bowed out with a lopsided loss to Villanova on Saturday night. Heald, who entered the Final Four as the nation's second leading scorer, scored only 9 points in his final collegiate game. Still, Sadler was happy to see Heald captivate fans with his perimeter shooting and scoring ability, mostly because of how Heald made it all happen. You're happy for him because I think more than anything, he's an example of a kid that no question was talented, but most of his success has come from more work habits than talent, said Sadler, now the head coach of Southern Mississippi. He's not the quickest guy, not the fastest guy, but he has definitely developed a skill from just working and working and working hours and hours and hours. While Flanagan, who last week was named head coach at Arkansas Little Rock, was Heald's main recruiter, Sadler also had a couple of connections to Heald, who came to play for Sunrise Christian from his home in Freeport, Bahamas. Pardon me. Roger Farrington, who played at Arizona State from 1995 to 97, when Sadler was on the Sun Devils staff, knew Heald. Sadler also had a long relationship with Darrell Sears, a prominent youth basketball coach in the Bahamas, who was close with Heald, and also had a close friendship with Oklahoma assistant coach Chris Crutchfield. Heald played on the same summer league team as Wichita native Perry Ellis, who just finished his career at Kansas. A lot of people just didn't recruit him, Sadler said of Heald. Wes saw him. He was down there in the spring at Sunrise Christian and saw him, and we started recruiting him. Nobody was recruiting him at that time. We stayed in there. We got him up on 2 different occasions. He came up 2 times in the fall before committing to Oklahoma. Sadler, on the staff at Kansas and Iowa State before taking the Southern Miss job, saw Heald up close for 2 reasons. I can remember the year I was at Kansas talking to Oklahoma coach Lon Kruger before a game about Buddy, Sadler said. And he was telling me, man, the guy just stays in the gym all the time. That kind of made sense. Very, very humble. He has that natural smile, unbelievable passion for the game, too. He just loves to play, you can tell. When Sadler was with the Cyclones, Heald scored a then career-high 30 points at number 16 Iowa State, shooting 10 for 18 on field goals and 5 for 8 on three-pointers. Then he made a then career-high 6 three-pointers on 12 attempts and scored 22 points in a home win against number 9 Iowa State. What's kind of neat is he has put in so much time, Sadler said. You hear guys talk about doing it, but he's definitely been a guy in 4 years that has put in hours and hours and hours. It's neat to see guys willing to work instead of expecting it to be given to them. That's what I have.
Yeah, well, it's amazing if you to think what would have happened if he would have come to Nebraska. He sure made a big difference for that Oklahoma team.
Yeah,
and we think of a few guys at Creighton that made be a huge difference for them as well. But he ended up going to Oklahoma, and the rest is history. And I was kind of surprised they got blown out last night, but They made a run to the Final Four, that's for sure.
Well, they did, and they ran into a buzzsaw with Villanova. But what are you going to do? Team plays and shoots at the second best shooting percentage of all time in the Final Four. You're not going to win. I mean,
yeah.
You don't beat a team that shoots 71%. You just don't.
Yeah, you don't. And Jay Wright was very humble after the game when they interviewed him. He said, "Hey, look, we've all had nights like this. You know, my heart goes out to the Oklahoma team." He said, "I've had nights like this, but we'll take the victory. We'll take what we did." And so it's about another 20 minutes. It's Villanova versus Carolina for the North Carolina for the championship. And Tom, thanks for filling in for Jim tonight.
Steve, you're welcome, and I'm sure you're anxious to get Jim back next week.
Well, I think you did a great job. I think you're a lot funnier than Jim.
Well, you're an audience of one. Thank you very much.
We're going to turn things over to Emily back in the control room.
All right. So that brings us right up to that 8 o'clock hour.
Wow.